Most people never notice it, but one quiet habit controls more of their life than they realize. It slips into conversations, relationships, and decisions without being questioned, as if it were normal. And the habit is this: the constant urge to explain yourself. Why you said no. Why you're tired. Why you didn't reply. Why you feel what you feel. Why you made a choice. On the surface, it looks polite. It looks considerate. But psychologically, it comes from a much deeper place. A place Carl Jung understood with uncomfortable clarity. Jung believed that the person who constantly explains themselves isn't trying to communicate. They are trying to earn the right to exist. And once you hear that, it hits hard. The truth is, most people were raised in environments where their feelings were dismissed long before they could understand what that meant. You cried and heard you're being dramatic. You were afraid and heard, don't be silly. You were angry and heard, don't you dare talk like that. Slowly, the message sank in. Your inner world is valid only when others approve of it. That wound doesn't disappear when you grow up. It just changes shape. As an adult, you justify emotions as if you're in a courtroom. You justify decisions as if someone owns your autonomy. You justify boundaries because you secretly fear that without an explanation, you'll lose love, acceptance, or belonging. Jung saw this as one of the clearest signs of self-abandonment, the moment when the ego, instead of serving the self, becomes a servant of external permission. Every unnecessary explanation is a small act of surrender. You're announcing that someone else's understanding matters more than your own truth. And the more you do it, the further you drift from your inner authority. That's why people who explain themselves constantly feel drained. They're performing a version of themselves they think will be accepted. This behavior often goes unnoticed because society praises people who are easy, agreeable, and endlessly understanding. But behind the mask of politeness often lies exhaustion. Jung warned that when you bend too far away from who you are, the psyche sends signals: chronic anxiety, emptiness, indecision, self-doubt. These symptoms aren't random. They are the psyche saying, "Come back to yourself." At some point, Jung believed every person must confront this inner pattern. And the confrontation begins with a single decision. Not to create conflict, not to be cold, but to reclaim the right to be internally whole. Because the moment you stop justifying your emotions, something powerful happens. Silence appears. And it's not the weak, apologetic silence of someone avoiding conflict. It is the grounded silence of someone who finally trusts themselves. Jung believed that this silence signals the birth of internal authority, the moment when truth rises from inside rather than being borrowed from the approval of others. But silence threatens people who are used to benefiting from your insecurity. Suddenly, you become unpredictable. You stop responding to manipulation. You stop softening your boundaries. You stop explaining your no. And this removes the fuel that allowed others to control your emotional state. People who depended on your explanations start to feel destabilized because the dynamic has changed. Your silence wasn't expected. Your confidence wasn't anticipated. And your refusal to justify yourself creates a shift in the psychological balance of the relationship. This is why, when you stop explaining yourself, many people react with discomfort. Not because you're wrong, but because you're no longer playing the role they once relied on. But here's the turning point. The silence you hold becomes a filter. It reveals who values you and who valued the version of you that always folded to keep peace. Those who stay, stay out of respect. Those who leave, leave because the imbalance is gone. Jung called this phase the desert of inner solitude, the discomfort that appears when you're no longer shaped by approval. But it's only in this desert that the inner voice begins to return. When you stop rationalizing your feelings to others, you finally hear them yourself. You begin to understand your boundaries instead of negotiating them. You start making decisions without building a defense case in your head. This is the beginning of psychological integrity, Jung's idea of becoming whole. An integrated person doesn't explain themselves, not because they want to win power, but because they no longer negotiate their identity. They speak clearly, but without seeking approval. They express emotions without apologizing for them. They set boundaries without justifying why the boundary exists. They trust their inner signal, even when they can't prove it logically. The world responds differently to someone like that. Integrity has a weight. It has a presence. You don't need to force respect when you embody it. People sense when someone knows who they are. Jung believed that when the inner foundation becomes solid, the external world adjusts to match it.